I've owned the Nintendo Switch 2 for just shy of a year at this point, and over the past year, the Switch 2 has been probably one of my primary gaming devices. And I've had a lot of great times with it, but there's also some things that the Switch 2, in my opinion, does not so well. And in this video, I'm going to go over my 1 year retrospective of this console and give my honest review on whether the Switch 2 is worth picking up in 2026 or if it's worth investing in one of the other consoles that are on the market. So let's take a look. Originally, when I was considering getting the Nintendo Switch 2, a lot of my reasons came down to the Nintendo ecosystem that you received with the console, and generally the fact that most of the multi-platform games that I'd be interested in playing would be better optimized for a Switch 2, for example, than like a Steam Deck or any of the other sort of portable gaming PCs, if you want to call them those, that are on the market. So that was kind of my original deciding point for the Switch 2, and I have an entire video detailing this. I just wanted to give you a bit of context as to why I picked this up about a year or so ago. Now, when I got the Nintendo Switch 2, one of the first things that I really felt that was a huge step up between this console versus the previous Nintendo Switch is the build quality. And the console itself feels and looks premium. It seems like Nintendo was trying to modernize their Nintendo Switch, but also make it look less like a kid's gaming device and more like a mature gaming device. And even looking at this in comparison to like a Steam Deck or anything else that's on the market, this looks very similar to a portable gaming PC in terms of its aesthetic. Of course, it still has its Nintendo-centric Joy-Cons and that sort of thing, but the actual overall aesthetic puts it closer to that than it does like Nintendo's previous Nintendo Switch. And also, even just the Joy-Cons themselves, the weight of the device, this thing feels premium, but it also feels big. It feels a lot bigger than the original Nintendo Switch, which is a good thing as far as the screen size and everything else goes. Now, getting into the actual device itself, one of the key features, maybe I don't want to say key features, but some of the key features of this device are, of course, we have a better graphics processor and a better hardware overall, and I'll get into that in a moment. But one of the features that have been kind of pushed pretty heavily with the Switch 2 is the mouse controls on the Joy-Cons. I will say, in my year using this device, I've only really tried it out once, and I will say it works well, and I can see the appeal. But I'm a person, when it comes to the Switch 2, I'm probably 70-30 in terms of 70% of the time I'm using this undocked, and the other 30% I am using it docked. Now, when I highlight that, when I'm using it docked, seldom am I ever really considering the mouse controls. I bought the Pro 2 controller with the Switch 2, so for me, it doesn't seem, I actually really like the way that controller feels and works, and even the gyroscope aiming works well on that as well, so I never really had the desire to use the mouse controls. But it is something worth mentioning. Another thing worth mentioning, and this is probably one of the first knocks that I have against the Switch 2, is the actual internal memory. So you get 256 gigabytes, which is a huge step up from the original Switch, but there's been such a massive change in the size of games that are out now that 256 gigabytes filled up pretty quick on my Switch 2. And that's just me juggling a couple big games like Cyberpunk. I downloaded that one, but Cyberpunk and some of the other games that I have on there. And then you add in like a Hitman, and you add in Assassin's Creed and Star Wars Outlaws. That thing's eaten up super quick. And, you know, with Call of Duty on the horizon, for example, if you're going to get that for your Switch 2, you're probably going to see that as well take up like 90% of the Switch 2 space. So out of the gate, that was one of the big immediate knocks that I had for the Switch 2. When I got it, I ended up getting Donkey Kong Bonanza, Yakuza 0, and I ended up also getting like Chronos New Dawn, and then ended up getting Cyberpunk right around Christmas time, and by that point I had zero space on this device. It was completely eaten up, and the only way to expand the memory, you can't use generic micro SD cards on this anymore. If you want to use them for Switch 2 games, you have to have a micro SD Extreme, or basically one that's certified for the Switch 2 to actually expand the space, and these aren't necessarily cheap. So that is something to really consider with the Switch 2, and is a bit of a minor annoyance. I was lucky enough that in Canada, I found one for around $50 for another 256 gigabytes at GameStop or EB Games, whatever you want to call it. So I didn't think that was astronomical, but I've seen them since, and they look like they're closer to $100 for that same amount of storage. So it is a bit of a burn if you really want to put all your games on this device. Now, even with that, I'm still filling up this device quite a bit, and I'm still filling up that SD card and finding myself having to delete certain games and put on other games. So the storage thing kind of sucks on the Switch 2, and it would have been nice even if they had an option to have bought in a bigger storage format for the Switch 2, or even had pack in with a micro SD Extreme card with one of the bundles. Now, at the time of doing this review, I just want to highlight, I got the Mario Kart World bundle. I think that's still on the market. There's a couple different ones. My opinion is that makes the most economical sense to get this in the bundle, because you get like $100 game. Games aren't cheap anymore, for like $50 if you bundle it with the Switch 2. Just a little side note that I thought I'd worth mentioning just because I got reminded of it. Now, getting into the actual screen itself, I know some people were a little not frustrated, but some people had commented, well, we need OLED and all these other things. I'll be transparent. I gamed a lot on my original Switch, and actually I took my original Switch, the last big trip I took it on was last year to Vancouver with me, and bringing that Switch, the screen, I thought it looked fairly decent, but when I got into the Switch 2, this was like night and day. This screen looks very crisp, the coloration looks fantastic, and overall the size, in my opinion, is where it needs to be. And what I mean is this: I never used the original Switch in tabletop mode. I thought that screen was way too small. It just didn't feel comfortable. The Switch 2, with the increased size as well as the clarity and the aesthetic of it, I use tabletop all the time. I'm actually a big fan of tabletop with the Switch 2, and you have probably like a new feature on the Switch 2 is you have this nice kickstand on the back that has a strong, strong's not the right word, but a large amount of range for how it can angle and everything else. I use it a lot. I even used it before writing this or starting this video. I used it today. I really like the tabletop mode because of the size of the screen and the quality of the screen, which I think is awesome. And moving further into the Switch 2 overall, you do have the Joy-Cons, and this is a knock, and it's not a good knock. It's a knock that's worth mentioning. The Switch 2 has the new Joy-Cons, the Joy-Con 2s, which are a bit bigger, and they got this super cool magnetic feature where they just kind of magnetically attach to the Switch 2. It feels cool when you put it on and take them off and all that sort of stuff. But they haven't done much to change the quality of the joysticks in a couple different ways, actually. The first way is that these aren't Hall effect joysticks, which I understand the complaints. Now, I personally had very minimal issues with stick drift on my last Switch, and I used that thing quite a lot. However, it was a problem, and near the end of the lifespan of my Nintendo Switch, it was becoming a problem. On the Switch 2, they haven't really changed that. Now, the joysticks feel a little nicer to use than the original Switch's Joy-Cons, but they're still not Hall effect, which means that we have a higher likelihood that these are going to face the same stick drift issues. The bigger thing as well is Nintendo hasn't really done much to change the dead zones on these joysticks. Now, I have the Pro 2 controller from Nintendo, as well as I've used these Joy-Cons quite a bit with the cradle controller mount that you get packaged in with the console. And in comparison to like playing a Hitman on this, for example, the aiming is night and day between the two. The dead zones are still very awkward and very tight on the Joy-Cons, just like they were on the previous generation. Whereas the Pro Controller feels beautiful when it comes to aiming. And this isn't a review about the Pro Controller. I have a whole video on this channel regarding that. But I just wanted to highlight that when it comes to using the Joy-Cons just for general shooters or games that are requiring you to aim, they don't feel great. Now, I understand a lot of people like the gyroscope for aiming, which is awesome. And if you're going to use that in conjunction with these, you probably won't really have this same complaint. When it comes to certain games like a Hitman, I don't like using the gyroscopic aiming. Actually, to be honest, I don't even know if it's enabled on that. I haven't even tried it. I like using the joysticks. Just something about playing a game like that. I like using the joysticks. Whereas like on Donkey Kong Bonanza or Tears of the Kingdom, I don't mind supplementing the gyroscope for certain things like shooting my arrows or you know, throwing something in Donkey Kong. Now, these are kind of my minor gripes with the hardware. Getting into the actual upgrade that you're really paying for, which comes down to the graphics, you're gonna see a bit of a mixed bag here, and this is, and I mean this respectfully. So, the Switch 2, in terms of graphic processing, it's night and day compared to the original Switch. You have a lot of games that are doing such a massive leap when they're on the Switch 2 that a lot of them are very close to, in some ways, to the PS4 and PS5 versions if they're multi-platform that you've been playing. However, there's a couple caveats here. So the big killer portion of the Nintendo Switch 2 is the NVIDIA upscaling feature. And so what this is doing is taking a game that might be running at an internal resolution of like 540p, extrapolating that to like 4K. And on some games, we see this looks fantastic. I'll be the first to say that I was absolutely blown away with how well Cyberpunk ran on my Switch 2. Is it at the same caliber as my Series X? No, but it got pretty close. And that to me blew me away. Playing it docked and undocked, the game runs so well and looks so good. But this is also a byproduct of developers properly optimizing for the Switch 2 hardware. Whereas if you look at a game like Chronos: The New Dawn, that game looks phenomenal on the Series X. In my opinion, it does not look great on the Switch 2. It doesn't look great docked, and it doesn't look great undocked. There's a lot of flaws to that game, and that comes down, in my opinion, to optimization. And I'll give it to Bloober. I think they did the best they could, but that game could have seriously been so much better had there been more time poured into it. Now, I'm only highlighting this because I'm not trying to necessarily blame the Switch 2 for this. I'm also not necessarily blaming the developers for this, but I am blaming the situation that to really see the Switch 2 be taken advantage of when it comes to multi-platform games, it does require a good level of optimization. Whereas you play games like Star Wars Outlaws, I thought the game was very well optimized. For that type of game with that type of scale, playing it docked and undocked, I thought it ran very well, looked great. Resident Evil Requiem, you could definitely tell that it's been pared down on the Switch 2, but for what the Switch 2 was able to pump out, it looks and runs pretty good. And so if you're looking at this from a multi-platform angle, you're gonna get a bit of a mixed bag on those types of games. Now, getting into Nintendo games, you're gonna see that the Switch 2, of course, is doing a phenomenal job because you have that Nintendo touch where Nintendo can take weak hardware and really make it punch above its weight class. Games like Donkey Kong Bonanza look fantastic. Playing Tears of the Kingdom in 4K with 60 frames per second almost feels like you're playing an entirely new game. Now, I know you had people who are illegitimately playing this on their gaming PCs by, modding it and upscaling it and everything else, but on the Switch 2, if you're doing this legitimately like me, on the Switch 2, playing that type of game feels fantastic. Like, it feels like a whole new game. Playing it with that 60 frames per second, the visual upgrades, and the 4K resolution, it just feels phenomenal. And of course, the Switch 2 also outputs HDR, so you combine all these things, you're seeing some of these first-party Nintendo games that are just looking very, very, very good. And this leads me to my next thing. In 2026, we do have some solid games on the horizon for the Switch 2, But I could see how if you haven't bought the Switch 2 yet, I could see why someone might hesitate, because we're not full blown in that Nintendo ecosystem being completely unleashed on the Switch 2. And what I mean is, we're starting to see some great games come out, and we have had great games. Like Donkey Kong Bonanza to me is fantastic. I personally really like Mario Kart World. I was actually playing it yesterday. I really like the online mode as well. But beyond that, if you're looking at straight Nintendo games, I personally wasn't a huge fan of Metroid Prime 4. It didn't really strike me as being ultra exciting. Star Fox looks great, but now we're starting to get that rollout of some of the serious AAA games from Nintendo. So what I mean is, in 2026, there is a lot to be excited about, but a lot of this stuff hasn't happened yet. Like Ocarina of Time Remake, that's on the horizon. That's going to be a killer app for the Nintendo Switch 2. But these are just things to consider. Now, one thing that I do want to highlight with the Switch 2, and this is a bit of a knock at the console, is the battery life. So the downside to having AAA games like Cyberpunk run on this device, or Resident Evil Requiem run on this device, is that they consume a lot of power. To give you perspective, earlier this year I went to Jamaica and I was playing Resident Evil 9 on the way to Jamaica, and I got about 2.5 hours max playing that game. Previous to that, I was playing Cyberpunk when I went to Dominican earlier in the year. I got about 2 hours max or so playing that game. And so those were 4-hour flights. It kind of sucked because I didn't have anything to charge them with. It is something worth mentioning. If you are someone who's using this for traveling, which was one of the main reasons that I bought the Switch 2, you do want to seriously consider either getting a power bank or making sure that the flight or train or bus or whatever you're taking has proper ports so you can charge this while you're gaming. The battery life isn't great, and I'm not really sure with the form factor and everything else how much better Nintendo can make that. I understand that there are certain ways that they can optimize the hardware itself via updates to potentially increase that battery life, but when you are playing a Cyberpunk, for example, I'm not sure how optimized they can really get it to really consume less power. But that is a knock. And you know, again, playing it around my house, not such a big deal because I can almost always find a charger around my house. When I'm at home, I'm oftentimes, you know, in the living room with the kids or in my backyard hanging out and playing the Switch 2. So I'm playing those in like 1 hour, 2 hour spurts. But when you're on a large trip, for example, it is a little annoying that the device does die so quick. And again, I'm not sure what sort of limitations are held here, but it is something worth mentioning with the console. So overall, about a year later into the Switch 2, I'm gonna say that I'm really enjoying this hardware, and I'm really enjoying the hardware in terms of being able to play, for the most part, a lot of multi-platform games very well optimized on this device, as well as having access to the Nintendo ecosystem. I'm also very excited for the future of the Nintendo Switch 2. It looks like Nintendo has some great games on the horizon that are going to be hitting later this year that I think are going to really make this system a must-have for a lot of people. But as it stands, it's not without faults. I think there are some annoyances like the storage and the battery life on the device. But if you can look past those, I think the Switch 2 is the logical successor to the original Switch in a lot of very profound ways and a lot of great ways.